something happened in the void that no one can explain. A probe meant to study an ancient asteroid went silent just as it aligned with a visitor from another star. For hours the signal vanished, and when it returned, the moment was gone. Yet the data that should exist does not. The sun erupted without warning, and a twin object appeared beside 3I Atlas, moving in perfect formation. Sensors recorded impossible chemistry, light that behaved like matter, and whispers of communication hidden in the static. Scientists call it coincidence. Others believe it was an encounter that changed everything we know about interstellar objects. Tonight, we follow the trail left by Psyche's missing window, through radiation echoes, synchronized flares, and the birth of a twin that should not exist. Stay with me, because what we uncover may reveal that silence itself was the universe speaking. It began as a routine observation where NASA's Psyche probe, designed to study the metallic heart of an ancient asteroid, had been granted a rare alignment with something far stranger. The interstellar object known as 3I Atlas was crossing the same quadrant of space, a coincidence so perfect that astronomers called it once in a century. Every camera, spectrometer, and magnetometer aboard Psyche was ready to capture what could have been the first clear images of a visitor from another star. Then, without warning, the feed went dark. At first, Mission Control believed it was a temporary data drop, the kind that happens when solar interference scrambles transmission lines. But this time, the blackout didn't end after minutes or hours. It lasted for days. During that silence, something passed between Psyche and 3I Atlas that no one has been able to explain since. Engineers later found that the timing of the loss coincided exactly with Psyche's closest approach. That was supposed to be the golden moment when its sensors were aimed directly at the object. Instead, all readings flatlined as though a curtain had been pulled over the instruments. When the probe finally came back online, it behaved as if nothing had happened. Systems were normal, power levels stable, yet every byte from that missing window was blank. Not corrupted or unreadable, but entirely absent. It was as if the probe had simply chosen not to record. Scientists offered mechanical explanations, suggesting cosmic rays or an internal reboot. But those who examined the raw telemetry noticed something stranger. The clock aboard Psyche had advanced by a fraction more than it should have. Not much, but enough to imply that time on the spacecraft had drifted during the blackout. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers on Earth reported seeing a faint halo around 3I Atlas at roughly the same moment. Through backyard telescopes, they captured a dim flicker like an electrical pulse. Some described it as a shimmer, others as a quick burst that illuminated the surrounding dust. The official observatories dismissed these reports, claiming atmospheric distortion. Yet the timing aligned too precisely to ignore. The flicker appeared when Psyche went silent. Speculation began to spread. Could Psyche have encountered an electromagnetic anomaly? The sun was calm that day, with no active flares. Radiation levels in the region were low. Engineers reviewing the probe's shielding found no reason it would have been vulnerable to interference. If not the sun, then what caused every instrument to lose sync at the exact same instant? Inside NASA, the event was labeled an unscheduled communication gap. But privately, some within the team wondered if the blackout was more than technical. Certain signal logs show bursts of noise resembling deliberate modulation, like the kind produced when an external source interrupts a data stream. No one has confirmed this publicly. The agency's official report makes no mention of interference, only loss of signal continuity. Still, those few seconds of unexplained noise before the cutoff have become the center of an ongoing debate. For days after the incident, a subtle wave of caution spread through the scientific community. Independent researchers who requested access to Psyche's raw data received polite denials. The files were said to be under review. Even months later, when the probe resumed normal transmissions, the data gap remained locked. That silence became louder than any signal. In that absence, questions multiplied. What if Psyche's sensors recorded something that triggered a safety protocol? Spacecraft are programmed to enter safe mode when encountering unknown radiation patterns. Yet logs show no sign of automatic shutdown. The probe stayed fully powered, its orientation stable. It simply stopped sending. The mystery deepened when observatories tracking the probe's trajectory noticed a micro-adjustment during the blackout.
A small deviation, barely measurable but consistent with an external force.
NASA dismissed it as a navigation correction caused by minor thruster drift, but there was no record of those thrusters firing. To this day, no telemetry confirms that the movement was self-initiated. That motion, tiny as it was, suggests that Psyche might have been nudged.
Not by collision, but by something invisible.
Some have proposed a charged plasma wave, others a gravitational ripple from an unknown body passing nearby. Yet, the surrounding region was empty according to every catalogued map. If nothing was there, then what did the probe brush against in that silent void? It's not the first time a spacecraft has gone quiet near something unexplained. Decades earlier, when Voyager passed the edge of the heliosphere, it too experienced momentary static followed by unexpected magnetic readings. At the time, scientists dismissed it as sensor drift, but the Psyche event reignited those old comparisons. Could there be zones in space that distort data, regions where instruments fail, not because of error, but because of an environment we don't yet understand? Then came the whispers of a more unsettling theory. Some analysts believe 3I Atlas emitted a pulse strong enough to disrupt Psyche's electronics, a kind of directed burst or reflection. The comet, if it can still be called that, has already displayed traits inconsistent with natural objects. Its outgassing patterns follow geometric intervals, its rotation period shifts subtly in sync with solar activity, and its surface temperature fluctuates as though responding to light rather than absorbing it. If Psyche caught a glimpse of this behavior at close range, perhaps the blackout was an automated defense against overwhelming input. Another theory suggests that Psyche didn't go dark at all, but rather that its transmission was intentionally muted. During deep space operations, agencies sometimes withhold live feeds when raw data appears inconsistent with known models. This allows analysts to verify integrity before release. But the delay is usually hours, not days. And even after verification, the files are eventually published. In this case, the blackout window remains sealed. What's more intriguing is the pattern of similar silences across other missions. During the same week, minor data gaps appeared in solar observatories and even ground-based magnetometers. Each was small enough to pass unnoticed, yet together they formed a mosaic of absence. It's as if the entire monitoring network blinked at once. When the feed finally returned, Psyche's first transmission contained nothing unusual, at least on the surface. But the metadata showed a slight temperature variance, suggesting that something nearby had radiated heat during the downtime. The direction of that heat matched 3I Atlas's location. That detail, quietly buried in a secondary report, implies that the probe might have witnessed an event it was never meant to see. As data continued to stream back, some analysts noticed faint oscillations in the probe's magnetometer, signals that resembled rhythmic pulses rather than random noise. These pulses repeated with a frequency suspiciously close to the rotation period of 3I Atlas itself. Was it coincidence, or had the object left behind a magnetic fingerprint? Scientists remain divided. Some maintain that all of it can be explained through conventional physics, telemetry drift, cosmic rays, and statistical error. Others see a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. They argue that something passed between Psyche and 3I Atlas that forced the systems into silence. Whether that something was electromagnetic, mechanical, or intentional remains unknown. For the public, the blackout is little more than a footnote in an otherwise successful mission. Yet for those who study the anomalies of space, it represents a window into the unknown, a moment where human technology brushed against something it couldn't process. The data gap stands not as absence, but as evidence of contact, an encounter written in missing time. And if the silence was not failure but reaction, then Psyche might not have gone dark at all. It might have been observing something so far beyond our expectations that the instrument simply chose not to speak. When the blackout ended, everyone expected the missing data to reappear. After all, spacecraft do not forget. Every probe, every rover, every telescope ever launched by human hands is designed to store information even through the worst interruptions. But when analysts opened Psyche's files, what they found was not damaged data, not corrupted code, but nothing at all. The timestamp jumped cleanly from one moment to the next, as if entire hours had been sliced from existence. There was no record of error, no signal loss flag, no thermal spike, nothing that could explain the absence. At first, the team believed it was a synchronization glitch. A simple indexing failure could have misplaced the packets, scattering them across unrelated files. Engineers spent days combing through the backup archives, checking every redundant drive and relay. Nothing, even the raw signal files, which should have contained fragments of the downlink transmission, were spotless. There was no trace of the missing hours anywhere in the system. This is where the story begins to take a strange turn. Amateur data archivists who track NASA's live telemetry noticed something odd during that period. The public feed did not just go silent. It froze on one frame for nearly 6 minutes before switching to the standard no-signal placeholder. In those frozen minutes, tiny flickers appeared along the digital compression lines of the image, patterns that repeated every few seconds. To most people, they looked like noise. But to those who specialize in signal analysis, they resembled something else, structured interference. When independent researchers attempted to decode the flickers, they discovered binary sequences that were too precise to be random. The odds of such alignment happening by chance were astronomical. One analyst described it as data struggling to exist, a ghost imprint of information trying to surface through suppression. Yet, when this finding was brought forward, the sequence was quickly dismissed as transmission distortion. Still, the question remained. If it was distortion, why was it so uniform? Why did it repeat in perfect intervals during the exact window when 3i Atlas was in Psyche's direct line of sight? Some observers decided to cross-reference the missing time window with other space-based instruments. What they found only deepened the mystery. The European Space Agency's Solar Observatory, located millions of miles away, logged a brief surge in background static at precisely the same moment Psyche's transmission cut. The Japanese solar probe recorded a flicker in ultraviolet radiation 2 minutes later. Even ground-based observatories in Chile and Hawaii noted a transient blip that lasted less than half a second, too faint for any formal report but consistent across instruments. In other words, while Psyche was blind, something happened in the region of 3i Atlas that was strong enough to echo across multiple sensors throughout the solar system. The only thing missing was the one probe that could have recorded it in high resolution. NASA's official explanation was procedural. They claimed that the data during that period was irretrievable due to a temporary downlink failure. Yet when pressed, the agency could not specify whether the failure was in transmission or storage. Usually, when a spacecraft loses connection, the onboard recorder caches the information and resends it once contact is restored. Psyche did exactly that, except for those few missing hours. The recorder logs show a sudden gap, as if someone had instructed it to skip ahead. For archivists, that detail was chilling. Spacecraft do not choose what to delete. Humans do. Months later, when NASA released the mission summary, the blackout was reduced to a single footnote buried in an appendix. Data unavailable due to communications anomaly. No diagrams, no graphs, no comparison images. Just a line of text where an entire story should have been. That absence sent independent researchers digging deeper. One of them, a systems engineer who previously worked on interplanetary missions, used signal reconstruction software to test whether the missing packets could have existed but been erased before transmission. The program found faint traces of sequence gaps within the checksum logs, the digital fingerprints of data that once occupied the memory but were later overwritten. This discovery implied that something had indeed been recorded, only to be replaced by blank space before it reached Earth. When that finding circulated through online astronomy forums, discussion turned feverish. Some argued that the data was deliberately redacted. Others believed that Psyche had encountered an unknown electromagnetic field that caused a full memory reset. Either way, the pattern did not fit normal system behavior. Even more curious was what appeared next. In an unrelated NASA upload, a set of calibration images from Psyche surfaced for public review. Buried within one of those files was an odd checksum reference that matched the same period as the blackout. Though the image appeared empty, its metadata suggested it had once contained visual data. The brightness values were oddly high, as if the camera had been flooded with light beyond its sensitivity. To many, that was the missing clue. If the sensors were overwhelmed by a sudden luminous event, perhaps a reflection, a flare, or something else entirely, it could have forced the onboard system to shut down its recording sequence to protect itself. But even that theory fails to explain why every other sensor, from magnetometers to infrared detectors, also stopped at the same instant. Some have suggested that Psyche did record something, but that what it captured defied its own software architecture. If the incoming data exceeded a certain threshold of unexpected input, it might have triggered an internal safeguard that labeled the data as invalid and purged it automatically. It's a fail-safe against system corruption, but one designed for random errors, not coordinated blackout across all instruments. And then there are the comparisons. When the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter once encountered a cosmic ray burst, it logged fragmented frames filled with colored static. The data was messy but present. The system never deleted it. The same goes for the Parker Solar Probe during its brush with a solar flare. It recorded chaotic input, yet nothing was wiped. Only Psyche produced an immaculate void. What makes this more haunting is that several weeks later, fragments of radio telemetry from deep space antennas in Madrid showed strange signal echoes when pinging Psyche for calibration. The echoes matched no known reflection pattern. They came back slightly delayed, as if bouncing off something massive near the probe. This occurred during the period when 3i Atlas was still visible from that angle. To this day, the cleanest summary of the event is that there is no summary. The data that should exist does not. The instruments that should have captured history returned silence. Yet, the traces of what might have been linger in every supporting record, like fingerprints pressed into cosmic dust. Scientists who speak off the record admit that the probability of total data loss across all channels is almost zero. Each system runs on separate loops. To lose them simultaneously requires a unified command, either from the spacecraft or an external override. Since Psyche's own software shows no command history during that time, the implication is troubling. Something else issued the reset. That idea opens an uncomfortable possibility. What if Psyche witnessed a phenomenon that triggered a shutdown, not because of danger, but because of recognition? Some researchers have floated this idea quietly, suggesting that the missing window represents a form of digital refusal, a moment when the machine encountered input it could not categorize within known physics. The safest response was silence. Still, there is one final twist. Weeks after the blackout, data engineers discovered a small irregularity in the checksum alignment of subsequent files. A repeating header sequence appeared at the start of unrelated transmissions, always identical, always misplaced. When converted to visual form, it produced a faint gradient resembling a wavefront, as though an echo of the lost data continued to imprint itself onto later signals. Perhaps that is the closest we will ever get to understanding what happened. A ghost image, not in pixels or photographs, but in the rhythm of transmission itself. Psyche spoke once through silence, leaving only absence as evidence. And that absence, perfect and deliberate, may tell us more than any picture ever could. When investigators revisited the blackout window, they found one clue buried in Psyche's onboard environmental log: a sudden trace spike in volatile compounds. The readings were faint, almost too weak to notice, but the chemical ratios were unlike anything previously recorded in that region. Hydrogen cyanide, nickel vapor, and a spectral signature close to ammonia appeared for less than 20 seconds before the instruments went silent. It was dismissed at first as a calibration glitch, a ghost reading caused by a sensor reboot. But the pattern matched something that had been seen before, only not in space. It resembled emissions produced during chemical combustion. That discovery forced scientists to consider a possibility they were not ready to confront. If Psyche's sensors were correct, 3I Atlas may have undergone a reaction rather than an ordinary outgassing. Comets release gas when solar heat vaporizes their icy layers, but this was different. The ratio of compounds suggested controlled chemistry, as though certain elements were reacting in sequence. The hydrogen cyanide was especially alarming because it is both reactive and deadly. For it to appear so suddenly, there must have been a precise trigger. The mystery deepened when spectroscopic archives from other observatories were reviewed. A Chilean telescope had captured a frame that night showing a strange reflective band around 3I Atlas's coma. The band lasted only one exposure before fading. When analyzed, the light contained traces of nickel and carbon compounds that could only form under extreme heat. To produce such a result naturally, the object would have needed a localized energy burst, but Psyche's thermal sensors registered no external heating source. Whatever happened occurred internally. Some theorists began calling this event the chemical mirage. The term came from how it seemed to appear and vanish like a heat shimmer, leaving behind traces that defied logic. If hydrogen cyanide truly emerged from the object, it might explain why Psyche's instruments failed. Hydrogen cyanide gas can corrode sensitive detectors and alter electronic conductivity. Even a microscopic plume could distort readings. Yet, Psyche was hundreds of kilometers away, far too distant for a natural plume to reach it. This led to a radical idea. What if the readings were not from contamination, but from radiation? Certain wavelengths can mimic the spectral fingerprint of hydrogen cyanide without the compound being present at all. In other words, the probe might have witnessed light behaving like matter. That interpretation divided the scientific community. Some believed it pointed to a previously unknown interaction between sunlight and the object's metallic surface. Others saw something deliberate in the timing. The strangest evidence came from the magnetometer data recovered just before the blackout. For a few seconds, the field readings oscillated at a steady rhythm. When converted to sound frequencies, the pattern resembled a pulse. It was faint, mechanical, almost like a signal buried within the noise. After the blackout, the rhythm vanished completely. Later analysis revealed that the oscillations aligned perfectly with the moment the chemical traces appeared. It was as though the object emitted a pulse, followed by the release of reactive compounds, then silence. In ordinary chemistry, such precision does not exist. Reactions occur when conditions allow them. They do not synchronize to repeating intervals. This pattern suggested a process that was being regulated. The question then became, by what? One possibility is electrochemical activation. Metallic surfaces in space can accumulate charge from solar radiation. If an object contains certain minerals like nickel or cobalt, charge buildup can create localized electric discharges capable of vaporizing surrounding material. It could produce gas signatures similar to what Psyche saw. But this would normally cause visible sparks or arcs. none of which were recorded by telescopes. The event was invisible, silent, and perfectly timed. There is another layer to the story. A group of independent chemists analyzed archived comet spectra from earlier 3I Atlas observations. They found recurring anomalies in the same wavelength bands tied to hydrogen cyanide. Every time the object approached sunlight, those bands brightened briefly before fading. The intervals matched its rotation period. It behaved as though a system on the object's surface was responding to solar exposure, releasing compounds not continuously but rhythmically. Some astronomers compared this to a breathing mechanism, a periodic exhalation of reactive gas. Natural outgassing, they argued, cannot sustain that kind of rhythm over months. It should degrade as surface ice evaporates. Yet 3I Atlas seemed to pulse on schedule. The consistency led to speculation that it might contain internal cavities acting like resonant chambers. When sunlight penetrated certain angles, trapped gases could escape in bursts, mimicking artificial timing. It was a reasonable explanation until someone noticed the mathematical precision of the pattern. The intervals were too perfect, separated by equal durations down to the second. That precision reignited the chemical mirage hypothesis. The idea was that what Psyche detected was not gas at all, but a light-based simulation of chemistry, a mirage created by energy interacting with matter at a frequency beyond standard detection. Such a mirage could trick sensors into seeing compounds that do not physically exist. Yet if that were true, what was projecting it? At a physics conference months later, one speaker proposed that 3I Atlas might possess surface materials capable of coherent reflection. Essentially, it could scatter light in controlled interference patterns, creating false chemical signatures. This would make it appear as though gases were being released, when in reality, it was manipulating light itself. The theory drew laughter at first, but as more data emerged, the idea no longer seemed absurd. Several independent observatories confirmed fluctuating optical properties that defied standard reflection models. The chemical mirage theory began to take on a symbolic meaning. It represented the line between what can be measured and what can be believed. The numbers were clear, the evidence consistent, but the interpretation shifted depending on one's assumptions about nature. Some scientists clung to the view that 3I Atlas was merely a comet behaving strangely. Others whispered that its precision hinted at something engineered. When new simulations were run to recreate Psyche's missing window, researchers discovered that the only way to reproduce the readings was to introduce a controlled emission source with a predictable frequency. Randomized solar heating could not match the data. The system had to be reacting to a specific trigger. That realization forced another uncomfortable question. If Psyche's blackout coincided with this emission, could the two events be related? Could the object's pulse have directly affected the probe's electronics? In one experiment, engineers recreated the chemical mirage conditions in a lab using reflective alloys and directed laser light. They found that when specific wavelengths interacted, they generated electromagnetic pulses capable of momentarily disabling nearby sensors. It was exactly the kind of disruption that could cause Psyche's instruments to fail without permanent damage. The test was repeated several times with consistent results. The implication was unsettling. The same combination of energy and reflection that could fake a chemical signal could also silence a spacecraft. If that is true, the blackout might not have been a malfunction but a side effect of exposure to something far more sophisticated, a process that manipulates light and matter simultaneously, creating illusions of chemistry while releasing real energy into space. Perhaps Psyche's instruments did not misread the environment. They witnessed a form of physics that imitates life through chemistry. To this day, the chemical mirage remains one of the most debated interpretations in modern astronomy. It sits at the crossroads between imagination and evidence. On one side, a natural but extraordinary phenomenon. On the other, a hint of design. The missing data, the spectral pulse, the rhythmic outgassing, all point to an event that refuses to fit within known science. Whatever Psyche encountered, it left behind no debris, no images, only traces of invisible reactions dancing in the silence of space. It may have been a real chemical release, a light-born illusion, or something between both realms. But one thing is certain. In those few seconds before the blackout, Psyche observed a transformation so precise and fleeting that it forced the universe to question its own reflection. When the blackout ended and the silence began to fade from memory, astronomers expected 3I Atlas to continue along its projected path without deviation. Instead, a faint anomaly appeared in the follow-up observations that reignited every suspicion about what really happened during those missing hours. A second light, dimmer but steady, was detected moving in near-perfect parallel to the original object. The first thought was that it was a fragment, perhaps debris ejected from 3I Atlas during a burst of outgassing. But, as the days passed, the light did not fade. It maintained distance, speed, and orientation so precise that it seemed almost coordinated. Amateur astronomers were the first to notice the pattern. In multiple frames captured by backyard telescopes, the two objects appeared to move as if tethered by an invisible thread. When plotted against background stars, their paths were synchronous within a fraction of a second. This was unprecedented.
Natural fragments drift apart, they do not hold formation.
Yet this pair moved like partners in a dance, neither gaining nor losing ground. Professional observatories soon confirmed the phenomenon. The European Southern Observatory detected matching light curves for both bodies. Each showed identical rotation periods, identical spectral colors, and identical fluctuations in brightness. Even the reflected polarization, how light bounces off their surfaces, was virtually the same. For two separate masses to mirror each other so perfectly strained every law of probability. At first, scientists considered the possibility of an optical illusion. Perhaps a reflection of the main object's light off surrounding dust created a false twin. But further analysis dismissed that theory. The twin emitted its own distinct light signature, slightly phase-shifted from 3I Atlas's glow. It was not a reflection. It was real, and it was following the original with mathematical precision. As word spread through the astronomical community, theories multiplied. Some believed that 3I Atlas had split in two during the blackout, a common fate for comets approaching the Sun. However, no debris cloud was observed, and no change in mass or trajectory occurred. A split object should have altered course or decelerated, but both maintained a stable path as if nothing had happened. Others suggested that the twin might be a smaller companion object that had been invisible until now, hidden by the glare of the primary. That theory faltered when analysts realized the second light was brighter than it should have been for a smaller mass. There was also a stranger possibility, one that many were hesitant to say aloud. What if the twin had not existed before the blackout? What if it appeared during the missing window? The timing was suspicious. The first observation of the second light occurred just as Psyche's communication resumed. The signal returned, the feed reconnected, and within hours the twin became visible to telescopes on Earth. To some, that correlation was impossible to ignore. If the blackout was an event, the twin might have been its outcome. Data from multiple observatories showed that both objects shared a synchronized rotation pattern. Every time 3I Atlas completed one spin, the twin matched it exactly as though connected by a shared internal clock. Even stranger, their faint outgassing patterns, small plumes of dust or vapor released into space, appeared in symmetrical directions. When one emitted material on its eastern side, the other emitted on its western. This mirrored behavior continued for weeks. It was not random. It was coordinated. When scientists mapped their relative motion, they found that the pair orbited a common center of mass located in empty space between them. The distance was consistent, unchanging. This made the system behave less like a comet and more like a binary formation. Binary asteroids are common in our solar system, but for an interstellar visitor to display such precision was extraordinary. The odds of observing one during its brief passage through our system were nearly zero, yet here it was, two objects, perfectly balanced, spinning around an invisible axis. But the symmetry did not end there. Spectral analysis revealed that the twin's surface reflected slightly less light, as if coated with darker material. The difference was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it created a strange visual illusion. One appeared alive with motion, the other almost shadowed. Some scientists began calling it the mirror object, suggesting it might be composed of different material, yet built or formed in relation to the first. The conversation then turned toward one haunting question. Could the twin have been formed artificially? Skeptics dismissed the idea immediately. They argued that natural resonance could cause a binary system to appear synchronized. Still, others pointed to the mathematical precision of the alignment. Even the gravitational influence of the sun failed to disrupt their formation. As the pair moved closer to the solar wind, their bond held firm. That is not how fragile cosmic debris behaves. It is how engineered systems behave. Further analysis uncovered another peculiarity. When the sun's light hit the twin, a faint polarization reversal occurred, a rare optical effect suggesting it was covered in material with metallic properties. Natural comets rarely show such signatures unless contaminated by heavy elements. Yet the twin displayed it consistently as though wrapped in a reflective shell. If this was true, then the twin might not have been a fragment at all. It might have been something designed to remain invisible until triggered by a specific condition. Some theorists speculated that Psyche's instruments during the blackout may have activated or revealed this second body inadvertently. The probe's presence or its emitted signals could have been the key. To explore this further, researchers simulated the light and heat interactions between 3I Atlas and Psyche during the blackout. Their models showed that if the object possessed a layered reflective structure, an intense burst of radiation from the probe's instruments could have caused the layer to fracture or peel away, revealing an underlying core. If that core contained symmetrical reflective material, it could have produced the illusion of a second object until the layers stabilized again. But there was one flaw in that explanation. The twin persisted for months after the event. As the pair moved farther from the sun, they began to drift apart, but their behavior remained synchronized. Observations from infrared telescopes showed both cooling at identical rates, as if maintaining thermal balance through some unknown mechanism. At one point, both dimmed simultaneously before brightening again. The change occurred too quickly to be explained by surface evaporation. It looked deliberate, like coordinated signaling. The notion that the twin might be more than natural gained quiet traction. Some researchers proposed the concept of a controlled binary, two bodies functioning as parts of a single system. One could generate or modulate electromagnetic fields, while the other served as a reflector or receiver. This idea bordered on science fiction, but so did everything about 3I Atlas. The deeper analysts looked, the more evidence they found that symmetry governed the system. The chemical composition of dust particles captured in spectrographic data matched across both objects, but the isotopic ratios were too pure. They lacked the random variation expected in natural material. The uniformity was closer to refinement than formation. It became impossible to ignore the parallel between the twin and the silence of Psyche. If the blackout represented a moment of contact, then perhaps the twin was the response. A visible manifestation of something unseen during that missing window. Months later, as both objects drifted beyond the reach of most telescopes, one final observation stunned the scientific world. During a deep exposure from an observatory in Hawaii, the two lights flickered in alternating sequence. One dimmed as the other brightened, over and over, for nearly 10 minutes before stabilizing. The pattern was rhythmic, almost like a code.
No one could explain it.
The event was recorded, verified, and archived, but never officially discussed. Some interpreted it as a natural resonance between their rotations. Others saw it as an exchange, a silent conversation in light. A few even wondered if Psyche's blackout had triggered a chain of events that extended beyond the probe itself. Perhaps the twin object was part of something larger, a system designed to remain dormant until disturbed. To this day, the twin remains a mystery. Its precise movements, its mirrored emissions, its impossible synchronization, all defy easy explanation. Whether it was a fragment, a reflection, or something deliberately crafted, its appearance marks the most puzzling aftermath of the Psyche blackout. As it drifts now into the dark beyond Jupiter's orbit, its trail grows fainter, but its implications burn brighter. The cosmos rarely reveals perfect symmetry, and when it does, it often means design rather than chance. Perhaps Psyche did not just witness the birth of a fragment. Perhaps it witnessed the unveiling of a second self, a twin born in silence, moving in harmony with something that was never meant to be alone. And if that is true, then the missing window may not have hidden absence at all.
May have recorded a creation.
A reflection, a message written in orbiting light. In the hours following Psyche's blackout, something stirred on the surface of the sun. At first, the event seemed unrelated. Solar activity was at a minimum that week, with no major flares forecasted. The coronal holes were quiet, and magnetograms showed smooth field lines. Then, almost on cue, a burst of energy erupted from a region that had been dormant for months. The flare was sudden and directed along a trajectory that mirrored the path of 3I Atlas. Astronomers at ground-based observatories noticed it first. A ripple of light, faint but deliberate, traveled across the sun's southern limb. It was followed by a small coronal mass ejection that arced precisely into the quadrant where Psyche had gone silent. The timing was uncanny. Within 30 minutes of the flare, instruments on Earth recorded a pulse of solar radiation that carried an unusual modulation, almost as if the sun had emitted a structured signal rather than random turbulence. The most haunting part was that the flare seemed to emerge from nowhere. The magnetic map of that region showed no buildup of energy, no twisted loops that could have stored tension. Yet suddenly the corona exploded with radiant force, then quieted just as quickly. Some researchers compared it to a reflex, as if the sun had reacted to something it could sense but not see. Data from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory revealed more anomalies. During the peak of the flare, the plasma temperature briefly spiked beyond expected thresholds, then dropped into a cooler than normal state. It was as if a pulse of heat had been drawn out rather than released. Moments later, a narrow beam of energized particles shot outward along the same vector traced by 3I Atlas's orbit. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. When those findings reached mission control, analysts cross-checked timestamps. The flare began 23 minutes after Psyche's transmission failed. The ejection's trajectory intersected the region of space where the probe had been positioned. The odds of such alignment were infinitesimal. Still, the official reports described it as non-causal temporal proximity. In other words, a coincidence. But coincidences began stacking. As the solar pulse spread through space, magnetometers across several satellites detected synchronized fluctuations. The pattern repeated at regular intervals like a heartbeat echoing through the solar wind. The rhythm matched the same frequency observed in 3I Atlas's earlier outgassing cycles. A connection began to take shape, one that defied both distance and physics. Independent astrophysicists started mapping the energy dispersion of the flare. What they discovered was even stranger. The ejection was not symmetrical like most solar events. Its particles concentrated into a narrow corridor, a focused path that maintained coherence for millions of kilometers before dissipating. It behaved less like an explosion and more like a directed response. The solar wind had turned into a beam. Some proposed that 3I Atlas might have acted as a catalyst. The object, with its metallic composition and mysterious emissions, could have interacted with the sun's magnetic field. If its surface carried an electrical charge, it might have disturbed nearby plasma, triggering a resonance that provoked the flare. But that explanation failed to justify the precision. Natural interactions are messy and chaotic. This one was geometrically perfect. When the ejected material reached the vicinity of Mars, spacecraft there detected a subtle but measurable disturbance in the magnetic field. It lasted only minutes, yet it mirrored the direction of Psyche's last known position. Then, a faint shimmer of radio static was picked up on multiple deep space antennas, all tuned to different frequencies. The static contained faint harmonics, patterns of tone buried in noise. Those harmonics matched the exact modulation that Psyche had transmitted before its signal disappeared. To those who analyzed the recordings, it looked as if the sun itself had replied. The probe went silent, the object emitted a pulse, and then the nearest star released an echo that carried across the solar system. Some researchers described it as resonance, others as feedback. But for those who study the correlations between solar and interstellar phenomena, it looked like communication. NASA avoided those interpretations. Official statements stress that correlation does not imply causation, but they could not ignore the timing. The flare occurred at the precise moment Psyche was closest to 3I Atlas. The directed beam aligned with their shared trajectory. The radiation echoes contained the same harmonic frequency as the missing probe's final telemetry. The numbers spoke even when people would not. In the weeks that followed, the sun remained eerily calm. No further flares of that magnitude occurred, even though models predicted heightened activity. It was as if the energy had been spent in a single, purposeful discharge. The solar wind flattened, the corona cooled, and background radiation levels dipped to near-record lows. One heliophysicist called it the quiet after the conversation. Meanwhile, researchers reviewing data from the Parker Solar Probe discovered a delayed anomaly. Several hours after the flare, Parker's instruments recorded a pulse of high-energy protons arriving from an unexpected direction behind the sun. This contradicted basic geometry. There was nothing there to emit such particles, at least nothing known, yet the readings were undeniable. The energy profile matched that of the original flare, only inverted. It appeared as though something on the far side of the sun had reflected the event back. Theories multiplied. Some believed the reflection came from 3I Atlas itself, acting as a mirror that redirected solar radiation. Others thought it might have been a hidden mass or object orbiting beyond detection. The strangest suggestion came from those studying plasma harmonics, who proposed that the Sun and 3I Atlas had briefly synchronized their fields, creating a temporary feedback loop. If true, that would mean the two bodies interacted not through gravity, but through resonance, vibrating in tune like instruments separated by cosmic distance. In that view, Psyche's blackout was not a malfunction, but an inevitable consequence of standing in the path of resonance. The probe might have become a conduit between the two entities, overwhelmed by the transfer of energy or information. When the circuit completed, the system reset. The silence, therefore, was not failure but completion. What gives this theory weight is the lingering signature left in the interplanetary medium. Long after the flare subsided, detectors continued to record faint oscillations, repeating every 12 hours. They were so subtle that most instruments filtered them out automatically. But when amplified, the pattern resembled Morse-like bursts, a structured rhythm rather than random static. Some analysts translated the waveform into binary and found symmetrical intervals that defied coincidence. To this day, those signals remain unexplained. NASA calls them echo noise artifacts. Independent scientists describe them as the fingerprints of interaction. One physicist, compared it to the ring of a struck bell that continues long after the impact. The sun, it seems, had been struck perhaps not by force, but by recognition as days turned into weeks. The region where the flare began remained magnetically stable,
as if it had discharged a single definitive event.
Some solar observers noted that the corona retained a faint spiral pattern, barely visible but persistent. It aligned with the same vector that 3I Atlas had followed before disappearing behind the sun. The spiral resembled a tether, a faint scar in the plasma marking where energy once flowed. For the public, this event passed quietly, mentioned only in scientific bulletins. Few realized that one of the most precise solar reactions ever recorded had occurred in perfect synchronization with the blackout of a deep space probe and the trajectory of an interstellar object. But among researchers who follow anomalies, it became legend, a moment when the sun appeared to listen and respond. Even now, debates continue. Was it a coincidence, a chain of natural phenomena bound by timing, or was it something else entirely? The sun has always been the heart of our system, feeding energy to every planet. Yet, in this moment, it behaved almost like a participant. The data does not offer emotion, yet the sequence feels intentional. Psyche's instruments may never tell us what they saw, but the sun's reaction stands as a visible echo of that hidden encounter. Whether it was a burst of sympathetic resonance, a magnetic handshake, or something more profound, one fact remains. The universe has patterns, and sometimes those patterns align too perfectly to ignore. In that fleeting flare, the sun may have revealed a secret buried within its own light, a reminder that in the vast silence of space, even stars might respond when something unknown crosses their path. Inside Mission Control, the silence after the blackout was heavier than anyone expected. Psyche was online again, but the instruments were mute. Every subsystem responded to commands, every power line checked out. Yet the sensors that had been watching 3I Atlas refused to return meaningful data. To engineers, it felt as though the spacecraft was functioning but unwilling to speak. The team replayed command sequences, rebooted modules, and ran deep diagnostics, but the responses remained clinical and emotionless, stripped of their usual noise. It was a mechanical silence, not a failure. The telemetry confirmed that no hardware was damaged. The cameras were intact, the spectrometers cold but stable, the communication array fully functional. Still, the probe transmitted only operational code, as if reporting life signs without describing what it had seen. This created an eerie contradiction, a silent spacecraft that was fully alive. When the engineers checked Psyche's onboard logs, they found a strange anomaly. The system clock had advanced ahead of mission time by several milliseconds. Normally, this would be insignificant, but in deep space operations, even a millisecond can represent kilometers of distance. The clock drift meant that the internal systems were processing time faster than the mission control reference. No one could explain why. The first suspicion was a software glitch, but that would not account for the uniform drift across all instruments. Every onboard system showed the same skew, down to the decimal. It was as if the entire probe had experienced a moment of accelerated time, a brief jump forward, invisible but absolute. When asked to retrieve the missing telemetry, the system reported data unavailable. Not lost, not corrupted, simply unavailable, as if locked away behind a command that no human had issued. That was when the whispers began. Within days of the blackout, small fragments of communication logs started circulating quietly between departments. Someone had flagged an internal memo referencing unexpected instrument feedback. The phrase was vague but unsettling. Feedback in this context could mean that Psyche received an external signal and responded automatically. The memo was unsigned, likely written by an analyst who had seen something they were not meant to discuss. Soon after, another leak appeared, this time from a subcontractor who handled deep space antenna calibration. They reported receiving short bursts of anomalous telemetry, on the same channel reserved for Psyche, but at times when the probe was not transmitting. The bursts were brief, repeating at intervals too regular to be static. When converted to binary, they formed symmetrical patterns with alternating parity, the kind used in handshake protocols between machines. In simpler terms, something seemed to be talking back. Officially, the bursts were labeled interference. Unofficially, engineers nicknamed them the echoes. Some insisted they were artifacts caused by overlapping ground transmissions. Yet when they examined the spectral fingerprint of the echoes, it matched Psyche's carrier wave perfectly.
No other spacecraft used that frequency.
Whatever produced those bursts, it had copied the probe's voice. At the same time, smaller observatories around the world reported hearing a faint hum on deep space radio bands. The signal was barely audible, but its pitch fluctuated in the same rhythm as the sun's magnetic pulse following the flare. The hum came and went like a whisper carried through the solar wind. Amateur radio astronomers described it as melodic, repeating with almost human cadence. For most of the public, these reports were invisible. The Blackout story faded into technical obscurity, yet behind closed doors, a quiet unease grew. Scientists who once dismissed coincidences began to re-examine the timing between Psyche's silence, the solar reaction, and the echo bursts. The alignment was too precise to ignore. A private meeting was held at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to discuss the anomalies. Those who attended later described the atmosphere as both tense and surreal. Every theory felt equally implausible. Some suggested a feedback loop triggered by solar radiation. Others hinted at deliberate interference from an external source. One physicist raised the possibility that Psyche's instruments had been affected by an electromagnetic reflection, a phenomenon known as induced resonance. It could have made the probe momentarily mirror its own transmissions, creating the illusion of communication. But that still failed to explain the structured timing of the echoes. What made the situation even stranger was the lack of official communication afterward. Usually, anomalies of this scale generate a cascade of internal reports, summaries, and follow-up memos. This time, there was silence. No updates, no data releases, no internal chatter. Even contractors who routinely handled telemetry passing were instructed to pause their work. The Blackout had become a void not only in data, but in discussion. Outside of NASA, however, the whispers grew louder. Independent astronomers began cross-referencing the time of the Blackout with data from global magnetometers. To their surprise, several stations recorded minor but synchronized pulses during the same hours Psyche had been silent. These pulses appeared to originate not from the Sun, but from interplanetary space. The pattern repeated in intervals of exactly 10 minutes, forming a series of wave-like oscillations that slowly faded over a span of 2 days. Such signals are normally attributed to solar wind fluctuations, but the frequency did not match known solar cycles. It was more consistent with an artificial transmission, something modulated, steady, and precise. When plotted visually, the signal produced a waveform resembling a repeating loop, almost like a heartbeat. Some called it the echo of the Blackout. Then came the rumors from within European Space Agency networks. Engineers there reported receiving scrambled packets from a deep space relay node that briefly tuned into Psyche's band by accident. Inside those packets were unreadable code fragments repeating one sequence again and again. When translated from hexadecimal, the fragments formed 3 repeating characters: P, S, Y. The coincidence was chilling. To this day, no one has confirmed whether those fragments were authentic or the product of noise misinterpretation. But they added to the mythology surrounding the event, a mythology built on half-truths and restricted documents. The deeper analysts looked, the more silence they encountered. Months later, when the next batch of Psyche's telemetry was released to the public, something peculiar appeared in the metadata. The files contained checksum irregularities that indicated the presence of hidden layers, as if the data had been encrypted. Yet Psyche was not equipped with encryption protocols for scientific transmission. Its code was designed for transparency. This raised an unsettling question. Who or what encrypted it?
There were theories, of course.
Some believed that the probe's onboard system had rewritten its own code to protect data that it could not process. Others proposed that an external field had induced digital corruption, mimicking encryption. But one group of analysts, working quietly in collaboration with amateur decoders, claimed to have partially reconstructed the hidden layer. What they found was a string of binary intervals that translated to a pattern of repeating gaps, intervals of silence encoded as information. It was as though Psyche had recorded not a message, but the absence of one. In that sense, the probe had turned silence itself into data. The void was no longer emptiness, but structure, carrying meaning in what it refused to say. By now, even the skeptics admitted that the blackout had transcended simple malfunction. The probe worked flawlessly afterward, suggesting the event was isolated and intentional. Still, official statements avoided speculation. Publicly, NASA described it as a temporary loss of communication integrity. But behind that phrase lingered unease, the kind that comes from knowing a system behaved intelligently without instruction. In the months that followed, small hints continued to appear. A faint pattern on magnetometer readings here, an unexplained checksum offset there, each pointed back to the same idea. Psyche might not have been alone in the silence. The echoes, the hum, the encrypted gaps all hinted at interaction, something external moving within the network of cosmic noise. It is said that after the blackout, a single engineer left a note on the internal message board. It read simply, "Psyche heard something, and it answered by not answering." The message was quickly deleted, but those who saw it never forgot. In the end, the probe's systems returned to normal, its mission continued, and the world moved on. Yet among those who study space anomalies, the phrase internal silence and external whispers became shorthand for that elusive line where technology meets mystery. Psyche did not fail, it paused, and in that pause, the universe might have spoken. What it said no one can prove, but in the soft rhythm of static, in the encrypted intervals of absence, and in the faint hum that lingers still between frequencies, something continues to whisper.
It is not noise.
It is not interference. It is simply waiting for us to listen the right way. For months after the blackout, the missing window remained a haunting mystery. Engineers treated it like a wound that refused to heal. Every attempt to reconstruct the lost data led to the same outcome, a perfect void. Yet silence can often speak, and what was missing began to suggest what might have been seen. The first clue came from a pattern discovered in secondary sensor readings. Psyche's radiation monitor, though not aimed at 3i Atlas, logged a momentary surge during the blackout. The spike lasted only half a second, but showed an energy profile unlike any known solar event. It did not match cosmic rays, nor did it align with solar wind activity. The frequency was too narrow, too precise. It looked less like natural radiation and more like a directed beam. That finding prompted scientists to revisit the idea that Psyche might have encountered an emission. If 3i Atlas released a burst of energy at that moment, it could have temporarily blinded the probe's instruments. But the energy signature was inverted, meaning it absorbed rather than emitted radiation. It was as though the object had drawn light inward, a phenomenon that physicists call negative albedo. No natural body has ever been recorded doing that, not even black holes at close range. When that result leaked to the scientific community, reactions were mixed. Some argued the data was misinterpreted, that the spike represented an internal sensor glitch. Others saw it as the first indirect evidence that the missing window contained something extraordinary. A moment when 3i Atlas stopped reflecting light and instead consumed it. The next clue came from ground-based telescopes in Chile and South Africa. During the hours Psyche was dark, both observatories captured a series of exposures showing a dim halo surrounding 3i Atlas. The halo pulsed faintly, not in brightness, but in geometry. the shape of the coma appeared to twist, tightening around the nucleus like a coil. After the blackout ended, the shape returned to normal. When analysts converted the pattern into frequency data, it formed a waveform almost identical to the rhythm that had appeared in the solar flare. That connection reignited a chilling possibility that Psyche's missing window coincided with a synchronization event between the object and the sun. In simple terms, the object and the star had pulsed in tandem, and the probe had been caught in the middle. If that was true, then the blackout might not represent failure at all, but protection. The probe may have shut itself down to survive exposure to an unknown interaction. Weeks later, another piece of the puzzle emerged from an unlikely source. The Maven orbiter near Mars had been scanning the heliosphere when it detected an unexplained fluctuation in the interplanetary magnetic field. The wave traveled outward from the direction of Psyche's trajectory. The timing matched the blackout window almost exactly. This wave was not random. It moved as a structured pulse. Its rise and decay pattern suggested origin from a localized source rather than the diffused turbulence of the solar wind. When mapped, the wave's path intersected both Psyche's coordinates and the projected orbit of 3I Atlas. For those who had been following the story, the geometry was unmistakable. It looked like a direct connection, a bridge of magnetic distortion linking the two bodies. The scientists who noticed this correlation hesitated to publish their findings. The data was real, but its implications bordered on science fiction. Still, not everyone remained silent. A physicist from Prague presented a paper proposing that 3I Atlas could be surrounded by a shell of ionized particles acting as a resonant field. In her model, when the sun's energy reached a critical threshold, the field synchronized and emitted a temporary magnetic pulse. If Psyche happened to be within that field, its systems would have been overwhelmed by induced current, forcing an automatic shutdown. When the pulse ended, the probe would reboot, leaving no trace of what it had experienced. Her paper was dismissed at the time, but later data from solar probes showed that such resonance is theoretically possible, though never before observed at this scale. Then came a revelation that changed everything. A set of unfiltered spectrographic data from a European telescope appeared online, apparently released by mistake. In those raw frames taken during the blackout, the light spectrum around 3I Atlas showed faint lines where none should exist. These lines indicated elements such as titanium and iridium, materials associated with manufactured alloys. They were too faint to confirm, but too distinct to ignore. The telescope's operators removed the files within hours, but the images had already circulated among amateur astronomers. To many, it was proof that Psyche had seen something structured, something metallic. NASA never confirmed nor denied the authenticity of those images, yet the timing aligned too neatly to dismiss. If 3I Atlas revealed an inner core of metallic material during the blackout, that could explain the energy absorption. A reflective surface could have redirected the sun's radiation inward, creating the illusion of vanishing light. The object may have acted like a mirror focusing energy into itself. What that implies remains unclear. Another thread of evidence surfaced when analysts examined Psyche's data headers from just after the blackout. Normally, these files contained simple mission codes, but here, the first 3 packets contained fragments of compressed information that did not match any known instrument output. When converted into visual form, the fragments resembled interference bands similar to those seen in radio imaging. They looked almost like silhouettes. Some researchers claimed to see a faint outline resembling arcs or curved structures surrounding a central dark region. Skeptics argued this was pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Yet even those skeptics could not explain why the fragments contained values far outside the expected range of Psyche's instruments. The amplitudes were too precise, the spacing too intentional. The fragments were like tiny echoes of a picture too vast to fit inside the system's capacity. Those who believe in the reconstruction theory argue that Psyche might have captured the reflection of an organized pattern possibly energy bands moving through space? If so, the missing window may not be missing at all. The data could still exist, buried in distorted transmissions or layered within the probe's telemetry noise. Several ongoing projects aim to decode the anomaly using machine learning, hoping to reveal hidden information between the bits of silence. Meanwhile, other instruments across the solar system continue to detect faint, periodic signals that align with 3I Atlas's old trajectory. The signals are rhythmic, steady, and repeating. They do not correspond to any known source. Some believe these are remnants of the same event that silenced Psyche. Each pulse carries a signature curve identical to the magnetic wave Maven recorded. It is as if the echo of that moment continues to move outward through space, growing weaker with distance but never fading completely. If these signals are related, then the missing window was more than a blackout. It was the focal point of a transmission. The idea that space itself may have carried an encoded resonance terrifies and fascinates researchers in equal measure. If 3I Atlas emitted energy in the form of a pattern rather than light, Psyche could have acted as both receiver and amplifier, caught in an exchange beyond our comprehension. A few months after the incident, a quiet update appeared in NASA's internal documentation. It mentioned the discovery of low-level interference imprints across Psyche's communication systems during post-blackout operation. The wording was careful, but the implication was unmistakable. The probe had continued to pick up something even after the event ended. Those signals have since been filtered and archived, never publicly released. To this day, the missing window remains one of the most studied anomalies in space exploration. Every attempt to reconstruct it adds another layer of mystery. Some researchers describe it as a door briefly opening between frequencies of reality, a place where electromagnetic order broke down and reorganized into something new. Others see it as the simplest explanation possible, a system reset caused by unknown radiation. But even that theory leaves unanswered questions. Radiation cannot explain the selective silence, the rhythm in the solar flare, the metallic spectral lines, or the echoes still lingering in space. Perhaps the missing window reveals more about us than about the cosmos. It shows how our instruments can only perceive what they are designed to see, and when faced with something beyond that design, they choose silence over confusion. Maybe Psyche did exactly what it was supposed to do: observe without destroying itself. If that is true, then the missing data is not lost. It is encoded within the structure of that silence, waiting for a form of understanding we have yet to develop. Someday, when we finally decode the language of resonance and energy that flows between stars, we might replay that missing window and realize it was never empty at all. It was the first true message we ever received from beyond the known.